Hey everybody, Nick here, and today got a disassembly and maintenance video for you on this guy right here. It's the Kizer Knives Comet with Paul Munko, the colorful filth guy, gem of a human. But anyways, let's go ahead and take this guy apart and take a look inside. Now, anytime you see a knife like this that's got some extra screws to it, you got to wonder, well, which ones do I actually have to remove? Well, clearly we're going to have to remove the pivot screw because, well, there's that side. But the question is, which of these other screws actually need to be worried about? And I'll talk you through it here. This is going to be obvious to some folks, but I'll go ahead and mention it real quick. So this screw right here, I don't think we need to remove because it doesn't go all the way through to the other side. I think this screw is just holding this little bit of micarta onto the liner here. This screw here, I think we do have to remove because it's going into this standoff here, and that's holding the knife together. There are no other, and same thing on this side, and also the pocket clip screw, I believe. We can see the termination of that screw over here. So I think that actually the only two screws I need to remove are going to be this guy and this guy. The reason I'm thinking about this, though, is because we have these, we have a construction where we have liners and something on top of that. There is always the possibility that there are extra screws hiding underneath the liners. In this case, actually, it looks to me like the stop pin is actually mounted inside the blade, and therefore there are no other screws underneath in this area here, right? There couldn't be a screw underneath the brass or anything. So I really do think that the only thing we need to do to take this knife apart is to remove this screw, and then everything should come apart naturally. But we're going to go on ahead and see how that works out, and we'll do our best here. This is a non-free spinning pivot, which is a beautiful thing. It is a Torx T8 bit. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to show you this ahead of time, but the centering was slightly favoring the clip side here, and it was running pretty smooth overall. And then in the back here, it looks like T6. So let me pull my T6 out. Bring my my tools a little closer here. Torx T6 as I grab the bit rather than the driver. Nice. All right. Ooh, this is... Okay. Just a little thread locker there. Oh, yeah. There's the little thread locker. You can see it there. And as I suspected, it feels like it's working its way loose here. I'm just kind of gently rocking it back and forth here. And hopefully it's going to come apart here eventually, because it does feel like it's working its way loose. It just got to get the pivot over the liner there, or under the liner, I suppose. But yeah, I'm just kind of lifting, and actually at this point in time, we have entered a danger zone in that I have the blade is kind of out, so I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to deploy the blade, get it out of the way, and then kind of do a little more lifting here. This is always a point where I think there's probably a little bit of thread locker on the outside of the pivot, but I want to make sure that I'm not applying too much force here, because if there is another screw hiding underneath there that I couldn't see, okay, there was not. But I wanted to make sure I wasn't just like... Because if there was another screw under the bolster, I wanted to catch that. How is this bolster held on? Oh, that's brilliant. Look, the bolster... Okay, well, maybe you can see this. Here, let me zoom in a little bit. This is really smart. I like it. Where did my little pointer tool go? Oh, right here. So what we see here is bolster lives right here. Bolster comes out to here and then goes as far out as this screw. So this screw, although it looks like it's just holding on the micarta, is actually holding the bolster on as well. That's really, really smart. And that also means that the pivot isn't the only thing holding the bolster on. And it also helps for this to be an extra burly over-travel stop, meaning I can't push the lock bar too far out in this direction. That is a really nice little detail. I don't know who came up with it, but it is a good one. And it means that there are fewer screws on the outside of the knife. There's not like a screw here for the bolster and the pivot. Because the thing to remember is that without that screw, yeah, the pivot's holding it down, but it could rotate then freely. But in this case, that's prevented by having that, and I assume that this bolster does the same thing on the other side there. That's really smart. I really appreciated that. That was, it's a little tiny detail, but it is one I thoroughly appreciated. So, yeah, nicely done. It's always nice when you see those little kind of engineering touches that are evidence that somebody's thinking about that. And all the more so, honestly, on the budget end of things. This knife is not, like, cheap. You know, I think we're coming in around 80 bucks, although don't trust me right now. I'll get a better... I'll be more sure of that during the actual review. But nonetheless, it is not cheap, but it is certainly... not a high-end, super expensive knife. And as a result, though, it's very common that we see very low-thought, low-effort pieces being put out in that realm. This is certainly not that, or at least that little detail is effortful. It is somebody thinking very carefully about it. So that's kind of neat. I'm a big fan of that. If that's on the designer, that's great. If that's on Kizer, somebody at the factory, that's great. But either way, that's great, and I'm glad to see it. We see that there are no other washers, which makes sense because the liners themselves here are stainless steel, I believe. Here, let me grab my magnet. Yep, stainless steel. So we got ourselves stainless steel. I checked to see that it's stainless steel and immediately say titanium. Oy, 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 oy. Not a brilliant man. Anyways, so we have ourselves those stainless liners there. So we don't need anything for the bearings to roll against because it's between the stainless on the blade and the stainless on the liners. We do have a nice little pivot collar here that's just held in by, well, in this case, friction, but later on by the pivot itself. And was there no such collar on the other side? Oh, no, it came out with the pivot screw. So there you go. Screw itself looks actually to have no thread lock on it, which is interesting. I'll go ahead and put some on before we put everything back together. We see here the lock bar has been given a little bit of extra internal relief here, which is fine. That's just to allow it to bend the proper amount, which will help to control the blade. We do see some holes being drilled out here. That is, of course, for a weight reduction to get the balance of the knife right. And we see ceramic detent ball. Yeah, everything looks pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and put this guy back together. I'm going to use some 10-weight nano oil. And by the way, if you're curious about this or any of the tools I'm using, go ahead and check out nickshabazz.com/tools. You're going to see an entire whole situation website dedicated to talking about the tools I use for knife disassembly. And so you can check that out. Okay, the pivot here, and we see there's a D shape of the pivot as well as the liner here. Pivot here is going to slip on through, and I'll make sure that the D shape is in alignment, which it is. Almost feels like the top of the pivot is flared a little bit, which would have been why the knife took a little doing to get apart the first time there. But anyways, I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of lubrication onto the pivot itself, as well as onto the nearby liner. That way, when I rotate the bearings, everything should be spinning nicely. I'll go ahead and I'll also put a little bit of lubrication onto the bearing race there, which should mean everything goes smoothly. Drop the pivot onto position. I did install a bearing, yes, that's an important detail. Then I've already lubricated that side, so I'll put this in here, and then I'll just use the tip of the oiler here to rotate. And I think we're good to go here, so we'll go ahead and drop this bit back on the top. So as I'm doing this, I'm going to want to make sure that I have... This is kind of weird. Oh, no, it's just not a tight fit on the back here. Usually with these shouldered standoffs, meaning that see this little area here where this standoff gets smaller in diameter? I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see it. Usually that's a tighter fit into this hole, but here it really isn't. It doesn't really matter particularly, but I'm used to that needing to snap down, whereas in this case it's a hot dog down a hallway, so... you don't really need to worry too much about it. What I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do is, I'll actually clean off this screw, just get some of the old thread locker off there, although, by God, that old thread locker did not want to escape. Whatever. And I'll put a little bit of new stuff on here. I'm using some blue Loctite on a stick here. And drop this into position. I'm not going to fully tighten it down yet because, well, probably should zoom you back out a little bit. But not going to fully tighten it down yet because the pivot ain't in position. And, well, until the pivot's in position... Oh, I forgot to lubricate the detent ball hole. So that's not great. What I'm going to do instead is just to go in here with my little needle tip applicator. And I'm going to lubricate the detent ball itself. Just putting a little drop of lubrication onto the detent ball. That works too. And that's, by the way, a tip you can always take advantage of if you have a knife that you can't disassemble, because it was put together poorly in such fashion that it is stuck shut. But okay, I'm going to put a little bit of thread locker onto the pivot here, and then I'm going to slip the pivot in position. There we go, and tighten that down a little bit. Beautiful. All right, so now let's see where we're at. The detent got a little harder, which is interesting. The blade is now, again, slightly favoring the clip side. This, generally speaking, means that the pivot tension is a little high. So if the knife is in perfect adjustment, because if you think about it, the lock bar here is always going to be applying a force in this direction. So if the pivot is very loose, the blade will have a tendency to drift off to this side. Whereas if the tension is too high, very often it will end up going a little bit to this side. So, you know, it is very possible that the blade is just going to be off center here, but it is also possible that as I adjust the pivot here, oh yeah, see, look, as I'm adjusting the pivot, it's moving the blade around just a little bit back and forth. So, okay, I know that I am in the right ballpark for the pivot tension. Oh, not quite. I just moved that here, and again, I'm being a little illustrative for folks who may be newer to the hobby. This is a great first knife to get into the hobby with, for what it's worth, so taking that extra effort. But anyways, if you shake the blade back and forth a little bit here, you can feel a little bit of wiggle right now. It's called blade play. You don't want it. If your knife has it, you tighten your pivot a little bit. If it doesn't go away, you got a better knife. But okay, yeah, blade play's gone. So now I know that the back side can be tightened down, so I'll go ahead and do that. Tighten that down fully. And what we're going to see here is that the centering is, again, very, very slightly favoring the clip side, but it's so close that I don't really care, right? That's fine. Little tiny bit of play there. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tighten the pivot just a smidge more. And hopefully that'll get rid of that play. Yeah, there we go. And yeah, centering is close enough, right? I got no complaints about the centering at this point. Action here is, okay, the detent is a little calmer, which probably was because I had the pivot over adjusted at first. Yeah, this is running great. No complaints here. Everything went back together just as I expect. I'm going to go on ahead and I'm just going to make sure these screws here are tightened, because I was kind of dicking around with that as I was demonstrating. Yeah, I think we're good to go here. Clip is tight. Easy peasy. Lemon freaking squeezy. So there we go. This is done. The Kizer Comet is fully disassembled and maintained. I hope this has been interesting to you and that you have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.